The Sumatran orangutan is in a difficult position, heavily dependent on Sumatra's Batang Toru and Loser ecosystems. This formerly lowland species has now adapted to surviving in the highlands, eking out an existence in solitude, making these two ecosystems critical to their survival. Threatened from decades of lowland forest degradation and fragmentation, local communities and government-sponsored rescue organizations are now fighting back. With permits granted to local communities to protect their forests and use them to harvest non-extractive polyculture crops, villagers have a pathway and an incentive to protect the landscape that this highly intelligent species relies on. The question, though, is, will it be enough? My name is Mike DiGirolamo, your host for Mongabay Explores, a special podcast series from Mongabay.com's global team, where I speak with experts from the field working to protect the critically threatened forests and animals of Sumatra. Join me bi-weekly as I dive into the unique beauty and key issues of this one-of-a-kind landscape and the people working to protect it. This week, I spoke with Ponit Hadisiswoyo, founder and chairperson of the Orangutan Information Center, based in northern Sumatra. I spoke at length with Ponit about the unique challenges facing the species, including wildlife trafficking law, its failure to be enforced, and the situation the Sumatran orangutan finds itself in the wake of lowland forest degradation and fragmentation. But we also spoke about the literal seeds of hope in initiatives such as replanting 2,435 hectares of rainforest and over 1,000 hectares of rainforest being given back to communities to use and protect. While these efforts alone may not be enough to save the Sumatran orangutan or the forests they rely on, it is enough to give Ponit hope that there is a viable pathway towards saving not just this highly intelligent species, but many others that reside within these landscapes.
My name is Ponit Hadisiswoyo. I'm founder of the Orangutan Information Center, a local NGO based in North Sumatra, working to save orangutans and their rainforest homes in Sumatra. Orangutans in Sumatra are not as many as in Borneo. The total population in the whole Sumatra Islands is around 14,400, something, and it's actually scattered around in 10 meta population or 10 groups of populations in whole Sumatra Island. And there are two species of orangutans in Sumatra Islands, Sumatran orangutan, Ponga abeli, and Tapanuli orangutans, as actually declared as a separate species in 2017. And orangutans in the Loser ecosystem is actually one of the magnificent megafauna that actually exists in the Loser forest and in the Batang Toru forest. They are very special for the forest because they actually roam in such highly biodiversity hotspots that actually help our forests intact to keep forests to provide services for local people in terms of carbon sequestrations and all services such as water supply and everything. So the orangutan actually live in this area, which is also needed for human beings. And not only that, the only red ape living in the island is actually limited only these two landscapes, which means that our forest is very special for having such highly intelligent animals that actually coexist with humans. But unfortunately, the habitat is shrinking from time to time, and there are a lot of challenges in the way to manage and protect these species.
It is because of those challenges that have made the Sumatran orangutan, perhaps more than any other, largely arboreal, making them spend most of their time in trees.
The Sumatran orangutan is more actually living in arboreal style than Borneo. I think in the nature that more predators living in Sumatra, like Sumatran tigers, that actually become the main predators of many mammals in the island. And in terms of color, the color of around Sumatran orangutan and Tapanuli is much brighter, reddish, brighter. So it's actually very easy to spot when you're in the forest, when you see like a bright red, swinging from one branch to another branch,
And the location of their habitat means the Sumatran orangutan lives a less social existence in comparison to the Bornean orangutan.
Orangutans in Sumatra more solitary. I think it's more because the geography and topography of the area where the food sources actually scattered around and not many lowland left that become the habitat of orangutans. So probably in the past, orangutans in Sumatra is much more social, probably because of the fact that lowland is still exists without any human disturbance. While in fact in Borneo, most of area of orangutan habitat are actually lowlands and even peatlands that make the orangutans behave differently in terms of social behavior and also finding food and foraging and things like that.
However, peatlands also serve as a primary habitat for them, turning Sumatra into the highest density forest population of orangutans in the world.
But in Sumatra, there is also peatland that become the main habitat for orangutans, such as Singkil swamp forest, which is the highest density habitat in the world, where almost 1,200 orangutans live in such a such a small size area, around 80,000 hectares of swamp forest, and this makes the island, that kind of forest island, become the highest density of orangutan populations in the world in terms of the size of the forest block and in terms of the number of orangutans that live in the area. So probably from place to another place, we have a different characters of how orangutan try to survive. So this need a lot of research on that and how orangutan now become adaptive to the highlands. Because for example, in Tapanuli, in orangutan Tapanuli, they more actually adaptive to the highlands, to the high altitude area.
And yet, this is not how the Sumatran orangutan would normally live. Like its other relative, the Tapanuli orangutan, they have largely lost their original habitat.
But I believe naturally, including the Tapanuli orangutan, they used to actually live in a lowland area, and then now they adapt to certain level of area in terms of altitude, so they can survive.
Already in a compromised position, this means that for the Sumatran orangutan, the Loser ecosystem and the Batang Toru forest are what Panat calls the last stronghold of the species.
So the Loser ecosystem and Batang Toru landscape, I would say Batang Toru landscape as well, because in principle it's the same, principle of last stronghold for this species to survive. The loss of this forest is the extinction of this species. So it's very critical in the fight of securing the sustainability of this population. We have to fight for the forest, and we have to fight to defend the remaining forest. The lowland that is, more shrink more and more from time to time. So we have to really, really defend. Without the existence of this forest, so there's no future for orangutans in Sumatra, especially in the Loser ecosystem in Batang Toru.
Former podcast guest and orangutan activist Leif Cox has said that we are losing the battle to protect the three key orangutan species. And Panat made sure to emphasize that while the current efforts in place to save the species are not enough, they do spell hope for future collaborations between NGOs, governments, and communities that could.
So I'm realistic, but I'm hopeful. I want to keep the hope in my life. Our fight just need to continue, regardless of the degrading situations in terms of forest policy. There are many policies that probably put habitat orangutan at risk. So I would say we still have time. I think there are many efforts is in place, regardless not coordinated very well. But in terms of eyes and ears of what's happening on the ground is actually in that place. Like things that something wrong happened with orangutan, raiding the crops. Then actually local people actually care about that and report it. The case, that's just an example, but. Of course, the dangerous situation with the habitat being integrated, not fragmented, is actually. I understand the scientific background on that. When habitat is actually fragmented, and then there's such fragmentation of population that lead to separation of many populations that lead to extinction and inbreeding and isolation is actually bad for the species. But there are action and movement from local conservationists, local actors, that still care and that still believe that it's something that we must carry on. And we know that we actually fight against the deforestation, and combating deforestation is everybody's concern, and we know that we are losing the battle because I think in many ways some policy is probably not in line with what we are trying to do to save. And one side, we want to keep forest as forest, but one side, probably expansion of development into forest is also happening. So it's something that we need to deal with it.
He cites the growing trend of increased publicity combined with the voices of younger generations as being a unique variable that wasn't present over the past 10 years that could aid significantly in protecting the species going forward, but also that local communities still need more support to engage all stakeholders.
Yeah, I mean, what we're doing is not sufficient, and then we need more voices. We need more power to actually drive these efforts to a more sustainable result in terms of keeping forests and allowing species to coexist with humans in such a sustainable way. It's something that we are really trying to do. But now, young generations has becoming more concerned about this. So I believe there are many more voices compared to what we tried to do in the last 10 years probably. So it's more voice, actually. The destruction is more voice and more people actually trying to help, even though the people don't really know how to help, and then suddenly things happen. But I think in terms of efforts by local people, I think we need more backups. There should be more space for government as well to support local initiatives. Probably indigenous communities need to be empowered, need more, and probably what we are doing by NGOs are not enough. To engage every stakeholders. That's the role the government can play significantly to engage every stakeholders needed to help the conservation, and especially with the orangutans, and how we put in places the value of orangutans for the forest and for the human beings and for the ecological services. I just feel that the nuance of orangutan conservation is much more stronger. It's more actually kind of lifestyle that orangutan is our closest relatives, live next to our neighbor, our forest, which is our neighbor. Then allow them to exist and to actually flourish, in terms of populations and future breeding in order to sustain their survival.
One particularly large problem is wildlife trafficking and pet ownership, which the Human Orangutan Conflict Response Unit, or HOCRU, has been monitoring for a decade, rescuing 212 orangutans. But the punishment for the actual owners of these illegal pets is not enforced, even though it carries a 5-year prison sentence.
The law, there's no problem with the laws. I think 5 years, even some people say that, it's not too severe for punishing the perpetrators, but I think it's still good enough if we implement the law effectively and actually enforce it sufficiently. So the fact that it's not enforced properly, then some people actually think that the law itself needs to be revised. But in my opinion, we need to optimize and enforce the law, and it will become a good and effective laws. So in terms of pet owners that not punished, I think it's sometimes quite difficult. It's a difficult situation for the government to process such cases, because local communities, when they keep wildlife as pets, and I think the culture of surrounding the animal is the best approach by the government to actually persuade, a kind of persuasive approach rather than a litigation approach. And that is the bottom line of why things happen, which is, of course, not really good for the conservation, because I myself value that keeping orangutan at home as a pet is also part of the wildlife trafficking. because many owners involved in the buying of the orangutan, or actually the owner is part of the wildlife traders, or even the owner become the poaching networks. So it's possible. And of course, in reality, I believe that education is the best way to change this situation, and then that's why the government is always trying to use kind of educational approach by not actually prosecuting the people who actually involved in the illegal keeping of orangutan. That's the answer that I can say, and that is the bottom line, I think.
The issue is made even worse by the fact that when juvenile orangutans are stolen from their families, the poacher will very often kill the mother, who fights with everything she has to save the baby from capture.
Orangutan mother is the best motherhood in the world. They will not allow anyone to touch, even to damage or even take the baby from the mother. They will look after the baby until 6 to 8 years old, and within this time, the mother will do everything to protect the babies. For poachers to get the baby, then they have to try to fight against the mother in many ways. When they fight, and even by shooting or using sharp objects to grab orangutan babies. So they have to do everything possible. I mean, the poachers have to do everything possible to get the baby, even by shooting the mother. So in many cases, that it was an evidence. Orangutan baby in Aceh in last year case that the baby apparently died because he was very young, taken by the local poachers, and then the mother actually injured severely and then tried to survive, and then finally the orangutan mother actually recovered and survived. But look at the way he was treated, by the poachers. He was shot more than 60 times, and then his bones were fractured, and then suffering such a lot of other injuries. So it shows that the fact that mother orangutans protect everything possible to secure the baby from other possible enemies, including humans.
Hokru has been instrumental in not just rescuing orangutans, but preventing trafficking and educating local communities in protecting the species. It was started in 2010 and serves also to further the orangutan conservation plan started by the Indonesian government in 2018.
Hokru, a Human Orangutan Conflict Response Unit, is a mobile unit dedicated to help orangutans in the conflict situations and supporting the government to help address the conflict. So we work closely with the local wildlife authorities to tackle conflict problems. So, for example, we receive response report of conflict from local communities, and then the local authorities actually contacted us to help the orangutans in need of help. So this unit is very essential for Sumatra because there's no such unit specialized to address the conflict problems. So at the beginning, this unit focused on educating the local communities, and then training local communities to implement safe conflict mitigation methodologies, by not shooting, throwing, or anything that damaging orangutan's life. But also this team is trying to prevent the conflict, and trying to help the government to educate the local people, and also respond potential conflict, or even our team survey the area that is prone to conflict, and the area that probably has some isolated orangutan population in a small forest patch inside the plantation, maybe. So we monitor these individuals and try to push orangutan back to the forest. Is our main effort as well, and this is something that we've been doing for the last 10 years. And that number of orangutan rescue as you mentioned, 212 orangutans is actually quite high. That number is actually more than 1% of the total wild population in Sumatra, because it's 14,400. So 1% is actually 140. So more than 1% of the orangutans already translocated and rescued. If this 1% is not actually tackled properly, or this individual that have been rescued are not actually handled properly and end up in the conflict and in the wildlife trafficking and in trade, that is actually quite a serious state for the conservation orangutans, because one pressure of hunting, for example, for the population is actually a big risk, because the orangutan actually breed very slowly. So if there is 1% of annual poaching of the wild population, it will be at serious risk for the orangutan because they breed very slowly. So one orangutan mother breed after 9 years, after the first baby. So in the whole life of orangutans actually breed only 3 or 4 babies, And with 1% of hunting prey or even killing pressure, that will put orangutan at risk.
However, Panat stresses that despite the success rate of rescuing the species, this ultimately is not viable in their long-term protection.
I don't say rescue is an indicator of success, So I never say it's actually a success of, I know in terms of success in securing the lives of orangutans, yes, actually our translocation success rate in translocation probably almost 100%. We have no problem with the casualties as a result of translocations. But there are a few cases where we try to rescue an orangutan, but then the orangutan already severely injured because of bad situation that occurred to orangutan, such as being shot or being hit by an object and things. Then I think a few of orangutan actually died on the way to our center. So it's happening. The success in my terminology is bringing orangutan into safety from life-threatening situation. But to me, a rescue and translocations is not a success for conservation. I think it's only short-term help for orangutans in terms of addressing the conflict. But I think we need to stop the incidents. We just need to stop the conflict, and that will be the success of our efforts.
Recently, a road that runs 22 miles between the Karo and Langkat districts of North Sumatra was upgraded from being a dirt track to an asphalt road. And 2.5 miles of this road cuts right through the Gunung Leuser National Park and has resulted in the loss of 1,200 hectares of forest adjacent to the national park. And while Panat says that the road itself hasn't yet caused monoculture encroachment into the national park itself, it is really only a matter of time before this eventually happens.
Inside the national park, there's no problem of encroachment, but the road actually connect to other side that pass through other kind of forest types, which is also part of the landscape of the Leuser ecosystem. So the area where the road was built actually improved the kind of encroachment, but not in the national park. But I say that this forest is also part of the orangutan habitat that has been destroyed as a result of the encroachment. So this is something that we need to really work hard. And the area is not even proposed for palm oil because the altitude, but other crops such as, like coffee, when people drink coffee, maybe then you don't realize that coffee also a commodity that also grown in such a high conservation value area. So I want to highlight that the road that was built inside the national park does not cause any encroachment yet, but that road connect to other road that already exist in other kind of forest that now suffering from encroachment. But if this encroachment are not being tackled properly, then this will actually lead to expansion of encroachment. And this will also cross over the national park area. So this is really, really dangerous then. So we have to do something about it. It's next to the national park already having so much pressure from encroachment, then in the future, if we don't do something really hard, it will cause such a kind of trouble.
Meanwhile, the road does present implications for the well-being of not just orangutans, but other species as well, including humans traveling on the road. This has prompted UNESCO to call for an environmental impact assessment to be conducted, which Ponit is helping to put together with the use of monitoring traffic and to suggest mitigation strategies for animal and traffic conflict.
Before the project was proposed, and I was involved to advocate the government to to consider carefully about this proposal, but it's then becoming a political agenda, and then local parliament members actually pushed this proposal to become a reality in 2018, and actually it was approved by the government to carry on. It's a shame, but I understand the complexity of this kind of situation, and the government has no such bargaining power when actually the local communities are actually put in one strong issues that activity is needed, but the habitat itself is really important. But then, and again, this is a political decision, and then. The need of local peoples, in terms of connectivity to one place to another place is very high in that area. And then, the government actually, decided to finally approve the improvement of the dirt road to become a kind of, asphalt road. And it already fragmented actually, but now with the fact that the road is getting improved, and it will affect the wildlife. The area is also part of the Gunung Los National Park and part of the Leuser ecosystem. And then the disturbance of humans on wildlife population is actually something already happened, and then it's now something that we need to address properly. So we need to really understand the potential impact on wildlife, and including the traffic. And then also how animals actually cross over the roads. And then we already conducted assessment on the potential disturbance on wildlife, and including impact on orangutans. And then we already checked the possibility of creating such a natural canopy connecting from one side of the road to another side of the road, and that's already in progress. And I think the UNESCO has requested further study on the impact. So this is what we have been doing now. We're helping the government to provide all the information on the potential impact and how we mitigate the impacts on this kind of road, which is as long as 4.5 kilometers along the forest of the Gunung Los National Park, which is part of the World Heritage Site.
UNESCO is hoping that the assessment and the data it provides can aid in putting pressure on local governments to reconsider road projects altogether.
So the impact assessment is in progress, and the way we want to mitigate the impact is also in progress. And then this will be submitted to UNESCO. And then if UNESCO thinks that this can be mitigated properly, then probably it can be a good example of how, this kind of pressure and, political pressures actually can be addressed in the future to consider, the roads being proposed in the wildlife habitat, also as part of the tropical rainforest heritage of Sumatra. Not just proposing the road, but you have to understand the impact and how we mitigate that. So I think in the future, this will be a good example that any proposal for roads should be, this assessment should be done prior to the approval of the road proposals.
As for the road that has already been built, the data could let local authorities know when to shut traffic down so as to avoid collisions.
So what we can do, for example, we want to probably propose a kind of closure of the roads, in certain hours. So by assessing the animal crossing, for example, and we can find that number of animals cross the road in such a high frequency in the nighttime, then probably we want to propose that the road should be closed in the nighttime. Yeah, so not only orangutans but also other wildlife, including even tigers that actually found in the nighttime, become active to hunt food, for food. So it can be dangerous for traffic users, So by assessing this Animal Crossing, then we know that in certain time the traffic must be controlled, and it can be mitigated by actually, for example, closing the road in certain times in order to allow animal cross. And this is what we are doing now by actually putting camera traps and then identifying animals that cross, and we can know what time and the number of traffic actually pass the roads. And also there is tiger that crossing the road as well in the area. So probably it's dangerous for motorists, to use the road by a certain time. So it's actually not for animals, but also for humans. The safety of humans is also priority by the perspective of the government and by us,
In addition to this, Panat and his team have identified locations of the road to serve as bridges for animals to cross, as well as portions where tree canopy can connect on either side of the road, providing a way for orangutans to cross as well without having to cross the actual road.
We even know the spot in order to build the animal bridge, that help one side to another side. It's kind of a hill area that has been cut from the past project, because the road has been developed in the past, but not actually being improved as an asphalt. So certain hill of the area actually was cut, and then this become always like the animal crossing area. So we probably proposed a kind of animal bridge, and then second is we already identify more than 20 possible natural canopy, like connecting one tree to another tree that become access for animals like primates to cross from one side to another side. But of course, we need to control the traffic, and then it's something that we might want to discuss more seriously with the government to provide kind of insights on the best move forward, for the roads, for the wildlife, and for the humans being.
But some of Panat's most notable milestones, which he believes are key to conservation of orangutans and other wildlife, are forest reclamation and replanting efforts, which he has been involved in since 2008, helping to replant 2,435 hectares of forest, and also making progress on the inclusivity and empowerment of women previously marginalized and underutilized in these efforts.
For us, the involvement of local communities is really essential to sustain a project that result in impact and outcome and result. And this is the resources that we developed at the beginning of the project. Since 2008, we started the forest restoration inside the Gunung Los Nasional Park that was illegally, encroached by, two palm oil companies. Then we handed over together with the National Park Authority to restore by planting a lot of trees and involving local communities. And that was become a success of our restoration site in the Gunung Los Nasional Park in Basitang district. And then it became our milestone, and we want to expand and try to reclaim more illegally encroached area by local communities or even by companies. So, and then the number of hectares of area that we reclaim actually increased from time to time. And then even now we expanded to single swamp forest, where it was about 300 hectares that was actually illegally cleared and encroached by a local palm oil company. And then we managed, together with the Wildlife Authority, we managed to reclaim the area, and then we are now actually managing the area. And in every step that we started, always begin by actually working with local communities, having capacity building training by local communities to understand the principle of restoration. And it became a success when we actually involve the local communities as part of local actions to protect and value the forest. And then we also involve women group, because many women actually marginalized in the conservation actions. And then we We want to provide kind of opportunities for them because many men actually get involved in the work, and then many women actually just not empowered properly. So by the chance that we have, actually we try to offer kind of resolution by having more women in our activities. It's still in progress, and I think there are still more areas that we need to reclaim together in order to expand the establishment of a better habitat for wildlife, including orangutans and elephants. And especially in the area that we reclaim is actually the major habitat for orangutans and primates and elephants. So it's actually now exciting to see elephants coming back to our planted forests, and then see orangutans actually roaming in the area that we actually used to plant as a small trees, and now becoming a growing forest that actually becoming a fruit of hope for us to see. And that's what I say at the beginning, that sometimes I'm very hopeless, but when I see things happening in such a positive way, and when forests actually being helped by replanting more trees in degraded forest and it become a growing forest, it's actually a kind of appealing feeling, to see that things can be done, still can be done to help the orangutans in the forest.
Panut says he derives a lot of encouragement from the endorsement and support of certain politicians, but also from local communities themselves, who make good on their responsibility to protect and utilize the forests they are entrusted with.
I sometimes found a green politician, I still have some connections with high-profile politicians who actually want to speak for forests and for the orangutans, and that make me, feeling more hopeful, to work in a good directions to help the forest orangutans and in the local communities. So that's one answer that I still have some backups, from green politicians who really wants to help, and they understand their role, that they can change the world by actually, helping the conservation. It's real, but of course, then other things like when local communities really take actions, following our steps and following our program to help the forest, is really good. For example, there are 3 villages in South Aceh that now actually protecting the intact forest, through a social forestry scheme, and then at the beginning, many people say that why you give access to these local villages who actually given kind of concession to utilize and protect the forest. And many people say that, maybe they will just exploit the forest. But it's been 5 years, and local communities there actually protect the area in a better way, and they utilize the non-timber forest products by actually extracting some, resin from a tree called damar, and then they don't actually destroy the trees in the forests, and then even so they actually become very protective to the forest, because other people from other villages trying to come to exploit the forest in non-sustainable way or unsustainable way, they actually at the front line protecting their own forest. This is a really good example, and that makes me feeling hopeful.
Panut's organization has been working with a program for the past 5 years, whereby communities in Aceh have been given permits by the government to essentially own the responsibility of protecting certain plots of rainforest. They are allowed to grow crops, but they have to adhere to strict land values and are not allowed to cut down any trees. This program has been successful, incentivizing local communities to protect the forest while making a living off it.
Yeah, we instituted it, and then we help the local community groups to get the license from the government, and then the government endorsed it, and then they issued the permit for our community members. They are now managing around more than 1,000 hectares to be managed by them. But of course, this is still under state forest, but they actually have access to manage and protect. And there is no such forest clearing, there's no such forest exploitation, there's no such indication of they want to convert the forest into, it's really good to see that. It consists of 3 groups, and I think each group has more than 400 hectares So times 3, so I think around 1,200 hectares, and then it become a good example of scheme that we can offer to local communities, so they can utilize and benefit from the forest in sustainable way, but at the same time they also protect the forest. Yeah, they're not even allowed to cut the trees, and then they're not even allowed to kill animals. And then we have some kind of values that they have to respect. And then what they are granted is actually managing and protecting the forests, and they can allow to access to benefit the forest in terms of crops, like even resin, and in this way they actually still keep forests as intact forests. There's no conversion term at all in the area.
Panat stresses that while this has been a successful operation, there are risks involved.
The intention of such a social forestry scheme, that we actually proposed to the government, and the government actually really, really appreciate it and really, really value this. But of course, the scheme can be a risk if it is not well managed, if it is not actually managed by a dedicated foundation who has no interest in getting benefits from the forest. So if this is proposed to government with the interest to convert the forest, that is so dangerous. So this is something that we highlight as a successful story for local communities. To see that the co-management can be an alternative to prevent conversion of monoculture. And then all the members of the local community agree that they don't want the forest to be converted into monoculture plantation.
And Panat and his team plan to expand.
We are expanding to Gayuluas, and then in the area we are now working to implement the same scheme for 2 or 3 local community groups. So in this way, we can actually showcase more success. We've been working so well in the area, and we recently met with the Bupati, the head of the district, and then our initiative has been appreciated so well.
Most significantly, Panat points to his organization's case of converting palm oil plantations back into rainforest as proof positive of the efficacy of converting monoculture successfully, and he believes that this signals a way forward.
In principle, we have proven that monoculture plantation can be converted into rainforest, and that has been happening. So I think we are the first NGO in Sumatra that actually reclaim monoculture plantation of palm oil into rainforest. So that was the first effort that was done by us in Sumatra Island, the whole Sumatra Island, where we actually reclaimed 500 hectares, together with the National Park Authority. This 500 hectares was purely monoculture palm oil plantation, and then we converted into a rainforest by cutting down all the palm oil trees, and then now becoming a secondary forest that many animals roam freely in the area. And there is an evidence, But of course, all areas in the national park or in the protected forest that has been converted into monoculture plantation can be restored, according to our experience. So, but of course, there's no point to restore other areas probably that has been developed so well with this monoculture plantation that already used by local communities as their subsistence and also for the industry. So I think most high biodiversity hotspot area should be protected, and then in the area that has monoculture plantation in the high conservation value area should be claimed and then converted into a growing forest.
Panat shared with me that he hopes for a day when there is enough national civic engagement and conservation that the difficult work of reclaiming dwindling biodiversity is no longer needed. But until that day, he stresses the obvious, that more support is needed, and that national unity around conservation from all sectors is the way to achieve this.
What we are doing now as NGO and activists and conservationists and civic society members working on this conservation is actually a good thing, and the government allows us to do this, despite of some, up and downs. But I think having us in the conservation work is really indicating that actually the conservation itself needs helps, from all sectors of a society, including NGOs, including activists, including, conservationists. And the law in Indonesia actually endorsed this kind of initiative, that the Constitution asks us, actually, civic society members, to participate in conservation, So this is something that we need to highlight among all government sectors, politicians, that increasing participation of civic society members in the conservation is actually a good thing, indicating that we are actually a very civilized nation and we are a very democratic nation, that they allow civic society to be in the front line, working hand in hand with the governments to, protect our own natural resources.
While many conservationists, including Ponnet, are realistic about the challenges that Sumatra faces in protecting its forests, let alone its orangutans, he believes there is potential for Indonesia to become a key player in tackling many conservation issues, including climate change.
And then probably in the long run, we will not need to do this because everything has been in a good state. Forest is flourishing, animals is breeding in their own space. We can coexist. That's the future idealism that I feel that, I want to achieve that, creating such a civic society where we actually live in harmony with nature. And it's a big dream, and then I think it can be reached by actually now working hard to stop deforestation, to stop animal exploitations, and to stop poaching, wildlife trafficking, and things like that. And then maybe in the long run, the world is much better. Indonesia has a better position to promote green development, green forest, and then the country that become the epicentrum for tackling the climate change problems.
I want to thank Ponnet for contributing to this episode and for his many years of conservation work in protecting the forests and lives of Sumatran orangutans. Mongabay Explores is an ongoing podcast series diving into environmental stories from around the globe. Be sure to check out the previous episode, which covers the efforts of protecting the Sumatran elephant. If you enjoyed this show, please tell a friend. That's the best way to help expand our reach and keep growing. Watch for a new edition of Mongabay Explores every 2 weeks, in between episodes of our flagship podcast, the Mongabay Newscast, which you can subscribe to wherever you find podcasts, or download our new app for Apple and Android devices to gain fingertip access to all our new shows and all our previous episodes. Special projects like this are made possible by our Patreon supporters, so please consider becoming a monthly sponsor via our Patreon page at patreon.com/Mongabay. Once again, that's patreon.com/Mongabay. Just $1 per month will really help us offset the production costs and hosting fees. Keep up with all of Mongabay's news from Nature's Frontline at mongabay.com or get updates via Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, where our handle is @Mongabay. Thank you once again, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Mongabay Explores.